All right, y'all, here we go. Good morning. It's a Sunday morning, and we're starting off great. It is 7:01, and time to get this sunrise sermon started. And we're talking about a woman caught in the act of adultery, but we're also talking about what happens when you get caught in the act. What happens when you get caught in the quote unquote very act, the very act of whatever it is that you've got going on. What happens to you? What happens in your situation? What happens with what you got going on? And God is God is not sitting there pleased with what you've been putting out there. What happens with that? And so let's think about that. Let's think about what's going on with what you have going on with God. Let's think about what's going on with what you have going on with God and how that works, how that's set up, how that's happening, right? It's just a matter of here you are, you're trying to you're trying to be as complimentary as possible, but man, God's got you, and He's got you right where you can't say much of anything about it. And in most cases, God's not pleased, right? In most cases, God's not pleased. And not only is God not pleased, but God is sitting there trying to figure out what are you thinking? What are you thinking based upon what we've been through, what we're going on, what we got going on? What are you thinking right now? And so, God help us. Let's get in more into this. Let's get more into this. And let's see what happens when we get caught. What happens when we get caught and we get caught right up in that, as the text says, in the very act. And so this is where it's just a simple reading of the text makes it easy. This doesn't start at verse 1 in chapter 8. This actually starts at verse 2 in John chapter 8. And I'm going to read this bit by bit, segment by segment, so we can get it. It says, now, early in the morning, he, talking about Jesus, came again into the temple, and all the people came to him. And he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. Okay, we heating up right now. They brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And this is going into the remainder of verse 3, going into verse 5. And when they had set her, right, when they had set her in the midst of him, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses and the law commanded us that such should be stoned, but what do you say? But what do you say? What's your take on it? Right? And according to verse 6, right? We get into it, and verse 6 says this was a test. Verse 6 says this was nothing but a test, of Jesus. All right? This is it. This is verse 6. They said this, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger, as though he did not hear them. He didn't pay them any money. Jesus did not pay them any mind. He just went on about his business. That's verse 6, right? Excuse me for not having all the annotations. And so they continued asking him. And when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, here we go. This is the part where we start getting into some juicy context, right? He raised himself up. This is based upon them continuing to ask him, like they're berating him, they're harassing him. And said to them, he who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. The person who's without sin among you, let him lead the way and throw the first stone. Ooh. And again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. What's verse 8? Again, he stooped down, wrote on the ground. Like earlier, it was like he didn't hear them. Now he's like, I've given you what to do. What you gonna do with it? Right? Now this part is we gotta follow along real closely. Then those who heard it, being convicted to their conscience, went one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. Right? So you've got every man who could be potentially offended by this woman being dragged into the temple in whatever condition she was in, since she was caught in the very act, right? Lord, no. She was caught in the very act. And every one of them, since Jesus presents this challenge of, okay, let the person who's without sin cast the first stone, and we can start from there. They just begin to fall by the wayside and get out of there and get off the scene based upon being convicted by their very conscience. Being convicted by their very conscience. We're going to come back to that. Now, here it is. Verse 10 has him raising up again, but now it's just him and the woman, right? And verse 10 says it like this. And when Jesus raised himself up, and remember he was on the ground writing, on the ground, acting like he didn't hear anybody, he saw no one but the woman. And he said to her, where are those accusers of yours? Right? Another verse said those who accuse you. Where are those accusers of yours? And has no one condemned you? Right? So Jesus is asking the woman, hey, where are those accusers of yours? Where'd they go? And follow that up with, has no one condemned you? You mean there wasn't enough folks without sin to start throwing stones? After all that, there wasn't enough. We couldn't find one to get the party started. And so he said, no one, Lord. Nobody. And he says to her, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Go and sin no more. Can you take that in with a smile? That Jesus simply said, I don't condemn you either. Go and sin no more. I'm not gonna get into that about what you did either, but go and sin no more. What happens? When we're caught in the act, or better yet, when we do like this text says, what happens when we're caught in the very act? The thing that, red-handed, right? Gotcha. We're locked in, and there's no turning back. What happens when we're caught up in that? What happens, and how does the Lord respond? Right? And so there's a couple of problems with the woman getting caught. And what type of sin it was, right? If the woman was caught in adultery, somebody had to be with her. Right? If the woman was caught in adultery, someone else had to be with her. It couldn't be this woman on her own. Right? And so we begin to see the problem of when man deals with sin, we start compartmentalizing. Right? The woman gets dragged in. Right? Isn't that what it said? It said they have found her. Right? And this was about, hey man, this woman was caught in adultery. What do we do? How do we deal with this? Right? This was early on in chapter 8. It's early in the morning. Jesus is in the temple. People are gathering. He's sitting down to teach them. And then here comes people, scribes and Pharisees, people who know the law, right? They bring a woman in the midst of him teaching, most probably not where she should be as a woman in the first place in that part of the temple. And then secondly, if she was caught in the act of adultery in the very act, that means she most probably didn't have time to get decent before she was dragged in. And so that means that there are some other complications with her being there and being in the midst of them. And then you've got people, if she's unclean, you got people who laid hands on her, so they're unclean, and then they brought her and themselves into the place that's almost the epitome of holiness, is the temple, and now it's just not working. This is not how it's supposed to be done. This is not what's supposed to take place. And if we're looking at this, right, this is wrong. Just the way they handled it, the simple way that they went about it was so wrong. It's not addressed in this conversation with Jesus because they're wrapped up in the business of, hey, we got something to get you, right? We found something where we can get you. We've got the thing that's gonna have you hanging by your boots by the end of the day, partner. You know, we got you. So they think, right? So they think, and they've done it. They've done it, and they've done it in the midst of Jesus trying to teach. Hey, boop, we found this woman. What do you say we're supposed to do with her? Because this is what the law says. This is what Moses says. We should stone her. What do you say we should do with her? What are your thoughts? What's your line of thinking? And so we're still dealing with what's she doing there? Why are they trying to hold court in the temple? Why are they trying to hold court at the teaching time? Right? That'd be like us being in the middle of testimony and someone started talking about somebody else's sin, and do we need to put them out of the church or not, excommunicate them and all this other stuff? Wrong time, wrong place, wrong approach, right? If we're a New Testament church, that's the wrong approach. And we'll get into that some more, but here we are, Jesus living the Gospels, right? He's living the Gospels out. He's experiencing it. And here we are with the master at this teachable moment, and they say, hey, enough about everything else, right? The big idea, Jesus, is this woman was caught in adultery. And caught in the very act. Moses in the law commanded us that she be stoned. Is that right? So let's look at that. Let's look at that. So they bring up Moses and the law, and they're referring to basically two references, right? Two primary references, which is Leviticus, which is the first rendering of the law, and Deuteronomy, right, which is the second rendering of the law. Right? There's Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Those both offer insight into what we're talking about. And so, looking at Leviticus, right, the text from Leviticus says it like this. If There is, okay, that's what it is. The man who commits adultery with another man's wife, he who commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. That's Moses. That's Leviticus. That's Leviticus 20. That's about the the conflict of sexual behavior and conduct. Right? That it says the man, right, and the woman. There's two people, right? I said earlier there are two people to commit the act, so it didn't make sense for it to be just a woman there in whatever state she was in. There was too much. It was too complicated, right? And what made it complicated was it didn't have a couple. It didn't have a man and a woman. It didn't have, other than a single person. You can't commit adultery on your own. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. That's God help us. And so that's the Levitical text, right? And then when you look at Deuteronomy 22, verse 22, this one tells you, right? If a man is found, right, lying with a woman married to a husband, then both of them shall die. The man that lay with the woman and the woman. So you should put away the evil from Israel. Right? It's like someone's getting the short end of the stick. Someone's getting the short end of the stick, and what's happening is it's the woman, right? And someone's making this judgment call, and then they have the nerve to jump up and get in the face of Jesus and say, "But what do you say?" What do you say? You know what I mean? We got the stuff that Moses said. We've got that. But what do you say? And Jesus could get into it with them. But I think what Jesus does is it's controversial. It's controversial. He pays them no mind. And so, as the presiding teacher, he's being posed a question, and he acts like he doesn't hear them. Regardless of the fact that they brought this woman in here and disrupted his session and everything else, and this is on the verge of sin upon sin. Jesus acts like he didn't hear them. And then after a while, he gets up, and it's almost like the Bible teaches it in the sense of he almost like he raises himself to his stature and says, "What of it?" Right? How about one of you who doesn't have sin? Right? How about one of you who doesn't have sin jump up and throw the first stone? Just talk to her. Get this thing started. Just launch it. Whoever's among you who's without sin, get the party started. Throw it. Chuck it. And we don't seem to have anybody who fits that. We don't seem to have anybody who matches that description of being without sin. Even it says their own conscience wouldn't let them do it. You know what I mean? It was like, man, what in the world? It wouldn't let them do it. And so they heard it, but they couldn't do anything about it. They heard it, they heard it, but they couldn't do anything about it because here it is. They know good and well this woman did this thing, but they're not going about it the right way. And Jesus says, hey, well, okay, if we're going to be stoning folks, let's just make sure we do it with clean hands. Boom. How much smoother would things go among us if we got our dirty hands clean first before we start trying to tend and meddle into other folks' stuff? How much will that clear up a lot of the conflicts that are unnecessary among us? How much would that work out better for folks than what we got going on among us? How much would that pan out? Right? So Jesus is saying, hey man, this ain't worth it. This is not worth it. So let it ride. Come on, let it ride. And he looks around after paying no attention to them again. He looks around and sees that there's no one there but him and the woman. And he said, where were they at? Where the ones who were talking bad about you? Where are they at? They're not around? They haven't condemned you yet? And the woman said, no, Lord. And Jesus says, neither do I. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. See, he saw my faults, but he supplied my needs. He knew that I was sinful, but he gave me what I needed to be supplied. You know, it's the way God works. It's the way the Lord works. That even though we may not be at our best, and definitely not in the moment of being caught in the very act, his push is not for condemnation. His push is for correction. His push is not to condemn, but his push is to have us be convicted enough to make a change, to have our hearts shift into another direction, convicted and convicted enough to not be condemned, but be able to make a change, and a change that sends us in the right direction. And so when Jesus says, go and sin no more, it's a relief, it's a comfort to this woman who's literally she still hasn't been tended to. She still hasn't had a lot of what she was going through and dealing with handled, because she was manhandled. And in being manhandled, she was almost mishandled, right? And so we have to be careful that when we start dealing with folks in the midst of their sin and what they've got going on, we can lay our hands on things and complicate it some more, to where what would have been a simple gesture now has gone berserk. What would have just been a simple handoff or pass through has now turned into this major showdown. And it doesn't have to be that way, but we make it that way. And we do so because we get in it, and we get in it with the wrong approach. Jesus challenged the accusers, hey, if one of y'all can stand up here who's got no sin and throw the first rock, let's get this thing going. Crank it up. And you let someone alone. And the woman says no one condemned her because they were convicted to their hearts. No one condemned her. And Jesus says, go and sin no more. What did that do for the remainder of her day? What did that do for the remainder of her life? That Jesus said, look, I know these folks wanted to do this to you, but go and sin no more. What did that do for her? What did that make happen in her life, that Jesus would say, go and sin no more. I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. I'm offering you comfort. Go and sin no more. I'm offering you a way to make a change and have a correction. Go and sin no more. Go and have a second chance at it. Is that what Jesus saying? Go and try again without going down this pathway. Does that sound like what Jesus is saying? It sounds like, if you could translate it, that might be part of what the Lord is sharing with us today. Hey, you got to get out of this thing. You got to get out of this thing and stop trying to whittle around and fumble around and say, well, this is sin, this isn't sin, this is a big one, this is just a little one. No. Sin is sin, and sin separates us from God. And since it is what it is, we've got to deal with it as is. And in dealing with it as is, we've got to know we've got plenty of responsibility to carry out when it talks about dealing with sin. Jesus tells us, go and sin no more. Jesus is giving us that second chance, that opportunity to go and do it a different way. Go and do it a different way than what's been done before. Take a different pathway than what's been done before that's gotten you into this kind of trouble. Change how you're approaching life. And if we take advantage of that, I believe there's a blessing in that. If we take advantage of the opportunity to live a changed life, I believe there's a blessing in that challenge to live a changed life. Go and sin no more. Okay? Trust and believe. We'll be back next Sunday. 7 in the morning. Continuing the Sin series on the Sunday Sunrise Sermon Series. This is Rev Bruce, offering you peace and love. Blessings to you. Godspeed.